Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Kathy Ricconi. Join us every weekday at this time to discuss news, spend time in the Word, and receive answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. And now your host, Richard Case.
Good morning, everybody. This is End Times Friday, and we have our special guest, Eric and Rabbi Ephraim from Israel. We are in the middle of taping this now, day 11 of the what they call Operation Fury from America, and the war with Iran, which was started, in cooperation with Israel. Our news over here, Denny, is that we just won. Which we don't quite believe yet, anyway. But it's interesting. So anyway, we'd love to have you guys start with, from your side of it, what is exactly happened, and what is happening, and what do you see happening this week?
Well, okay, I guess I can start. So the main task was the elimination of the missile firing and capabilities of Iran. So your listeners can understand, Iran has a suite, not just one type of ballistic missile, has multiple types of ballistic missiles. And they're using one kind to fire, actually two or three kinds to fire on Israel, and they're using two or three different kinds to fire on the Gulf states. The ones they're firing in the Gulf states have a different range. They can fire them, they don't have to traverse such a long distance, and often the warhead is not nearly as great as the ones they're firing at Israel. Obviously the ones that are shorter range, they have a larger number of, and the ones that have a longer range, because they're larger, more expensive to build, they have fewer. So on the first day of the war, Israel was in the receiving end of about 90 ballistic missiles. Just so your listeners understand, a ballistic missile is fired. It actually goes out of the Earth's atmosphere and then traverses to its destination, and then it declines out of the stratosphere to land on its target. There's something called a hypersonic missile, which is different, and they're not very common right now. And right now, Iran doesn't have that technology, and a couple of countries that do. In the case of Israel, those ballistic missiles were carrying warheads of a few 100 or so kilograms. And more recently, in the last few days, so as of yesterday, the number of missiles being fired each day at Israel from Iran declined to something close to somewhere between 10 to 12. And today, in the past 24 hours, I think there have been two in the center of the country and one in the north. And yesterday, one of the missiles did serious damage to a television communications set of satellite dishes that are used to broadcast and receive TV networks. And then one landed in the center of the country. It resulted in one death. I think another person died today from the injuries, so it makes two deaths from that strike. And there are like 14 injured. Two that were killed were actually construction workers who were on a construction site and didn't either have or didn't know about a bomb shelter nearby. So the Israeli Air Force has been focused on taking out the ballistic missile factories, the storage locations, and launching sites as best they can. The Israeli Army announced, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, that they believe that at the start of the war, there are roughly 400 launchers. These are often like your listeners can imagine like a semi-trailer that has a special hydraulic system on it that can go drive to a location, raise the cargo at a certain angle, and then fire the ballistic missiles. And so the Israeli Air Force believes they've taken out about 3/4 of those launchers. A lot of these storage facilities housing these missiles are actually buried deep underground in large tunnels. I mean, large, I'm talking about, they can fit probably 3 to 4 semi-trailers next to each other. That's the diameter of these tunnels. So they can shuffle them back and forth. I've seen images and videos of I think most of those sites are being taken out by the U.S. Air Force because they require large bombs. And those are not guided bombs. They're just dumb bombs that are dropped vertically from some aircraft, typically like a B-52 or a B-1 at high altitude. And they just drop them and they just land and boom. And they go. So actually, before they could hit the ballistic missile sites, they had to take out all the air defense systems, which include radar and other things that the Iranians had. That took place over probably the first 3 to 4 days. I don't know if people read my Substack, but not yesterday's, but the day before, I went into great detail on the step-by-step of what happened the day of the opening of the war. It was pretty amazing what the Israeli Air Force did and what technology they developed in order to take out the leadership when they did. So that's largely been the Israeli focus and the U.S. focus. Now, I think the Israeli Air Force is now focusing on whatever ballistic missiles they can still take out. The problem we have in Israel, at least, and will probably be the case in the Gulf, is now it's like the law of diminishing returns setting in. So every day where we were taking out big numbers in the first few days, those numbers declining to 9 or 10 missiles, and they'll probably get down to 4 or 5, but they're not going to get to 0. And that's part of the problem we'll have here. There's already talk in Israel that starting next Sunday, remember our weeks start on Sunday, they're talking about opening up the schools. Some businesses are open. You go to some cafes and it's like Israelis don't even care. They're out there having their coffee and whatever with friends, and everyone's like oblivious, and this is the way life goes on here, for better or worse. In my case, I was able to make it to the gym for the last 3 days. You have to schedule time. It's not typical. The gyms here, you have to schedule time in advance. And they actually count the number of people in a given, like in the workout room. There can't be more than a certain number of people in order to adhere to the regulations set by the what we call the Home Front Command here. So I guess what you call in the United States, the Department of Homeland Security, something similar. So that's the problem, is it'll never get to, it won't get to 0. And so we're gonna have to live, with running to a bomb shelter once, twice, 3 times a day. In my case, I'm in Tel Aviv at the moment. This is the first time I've made it to Tel Aviv since the war started. I have a meeting I have to attend to tomorrow, and so I had to come earlier. And just as I arrived in my apartment building, an alert went off on my phone and saying that a missile's on its way. And so I just found I wasn't near really a bomb shelter. As you might imagine, this is a major underground garage for my apartment building. So I just found 2 walls that had about probably be a meter thick, each one of them, and I just found a corner between them, figuring those walls would probably withstand most anything. So that's kind of what's going on with the missiles. The Israeli Air Force is now also moving into destroying the infrastructure of the security forces in Iran. These include the Army. The United States has taken the initiative to take out the Navy, which it appears that they've sunk 40 boats. Oh, by the way, your listeners should know something, because there are a lot of people in the United States and elsewhere throughout accusing the United States of sinking a boat without, consideration for the crew. But your listeners should know that the U.S. submarine that ended up torpedoing that boat, before they launched that torpedo, they were in communications with the crew of that boat and gave them the opportunity twice. In other words, they radioed them twice before they launched that torpedo, saying, you have the opportunity and we will wait until you can launch your lifeboats and get off that boat and get to safety. And they refused, so they launched them. So your listeners shouldn't think that the United States Navy is just, doing this, because there's some people in the United States going around saying stupid things like that. They're wrong. Yeah. There was one similar destroyer boat belonging to an Iranian crew that was docked in India, and India's allowed them to stay kind of in their protection, waiting out the war, I guess. Because I guess they think if they go out to sea, they'll get sunk by the U.S. Other than that, I think the United States has sunk pretty much the entire Iranian Navy, which is a really, really good thing. They had some kind of crazy aircraft carrier they built that allowed them to launch drones, and that has now been destroyed. But that doesn't mean that Iran can't cause problems in the water still. They have these speedboats that let them harass, and they can load them up with explosives, and like they did with USS Cole years ago, they can explode them next to a merchant vessel or a military vessel and do serious damage in the Straits of Hormuz. Right now, as far as I know, there's only been like one tanker that's traversed the Straits of Hormuz in the last 2 days, and it's starting to, as your listeners probably know, it's starting to impact oil prices. Right now, those oil prices are all speculation. It's not real. Just people presuming that it's going to get more expensive, so they're just, ramming up the price. But if they stay closed for much longer, they probably will start having a real effect on fuel prices around the world. But France is on the way. France is going to rescue us because they're sending an aircraft carrier. President Macron, that really serious military man has dispatched an aircraft carrier, and they're going to save the day. Lone Ranger's on its way. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, President Trump is making lots of threats, and the Gulf countries are pretty much, they're unable to do anything in this regard. So it's not clear how this is going to end quite yet, how that is all going to clear up. But your listeners should also know that President of China is also quite concerned about the flow of oil through that strait. And he has told his proxy, Iran, that they need to do something to open up that so they can get their oil. President Trump took out one of the other major sources of oil, which is Venezuela. I think 50% of the oil exports out of Venezuela were going to China, and that's now, I think, zero. And 90% of the Iranian oil was going to China. I think it constituted 13% of China's energy. So somewhere between 15 to 25% of China's energy just declined in the last 3 months based upon actions from the Trump administration. And I don't think anyone in Washington is shedding a tear. Certainly we're not shedding a tear here. So China's motivated to see that Strait of Hormuz open up. But my guess is Iran's going to...
We're getting
we're getting an alert. So
but we have a few minutes.
Because I'm calling you from I'm inside a bomb shelter, so I can stay here. But Ephraim may need to dash off. I don't know.
I can stay here till the alarm goes. Usually it's a few minutes in between if the alarm does go.
You got something you want to add to this while you're still with us?
Yeah, well, I'm still with you. Yeah, so first we'll just, we have to, Eric, make sure to get into Hezbollah in the north of Israel, because you're only one war. But it's a wild way to be living. And for each of us, like, you heard the alarm. I went to the beach, which you're not supposed to do, a little earlier with my kids, and there's hardly anybody there. But we chose the beach right next to a mall, which has a bomb shelter in it, and then an alarm actually did go up. The missiles are coming in from Iran while we're at the beach, so everyone just calmly leaves their falafel and their pizza or at the beach, and they just walk calmly over, and then they start, gabbing with the neighbors inside the bomb shelter, and this happens, many times every day. So everyone's sort of locked into being very close to some sort of shelter, and so that makes it really hard to work, and of course the kids aren't at school. So the whole country is like super stressed out in terms of like lifestyle, and it's hard to continue. I think it's hard. It's a hard situation to continue, but people here have a great attitude, because basically, all 10 million people living in this country are really having a hard time of it. Not sleeping at night, being stressed out, having children be afraid. But I'd say because we've been through it so many times now, like Eric was saying, like if people are going out to the malls and are hanging out at the cafes with their friends and doing most everything, as long as they can be, close to an easy escape when required. But in general, people are pretty calm and taking it in stride. And that's also it's because, thank God we have a lot of confidence in our air defense system, which has been really great, but not perfect. But also people are just so reassured that we are finally going after Iran. Iran has been such a gigantic enemy of us and has put literally billions and billions of dollars over decades of time dedicated exclusively to try and murder us and our children and every civilian living in the country of Israel, and to, create terror organizations, Hamas and Hezbollah. Like, just this has been like the major focus of this entire country for no apparent reason other than religion. So the fact that we're, finally dealing with this threat, obviously it can't come easily when they've invested billions of dollars into their infrastructure to try and murder us all. And so we're just happy and relieved that hopefully the situation at the end of all of this will be a lot better than it was before and perhaps radically different.
How do you, one question about that would be, are they willing to let's say, stay in this condition until the Iranian, let's say, conflict, goes settled in some way, ceasefire, something, and then that would be one question. Are they willing to wait that long? And then both of you, do you have any thoughts about how long that might take to get to a point where they just stop launching? They agree to stop launching whatever missiles they have left.
Well, I'll say something on the first, Eric, maybe take the second. But in terms of how long can we handle this, no one knows. Like every situation is completely different. The last Iran war lasted 12 days. So it was one more day that we had to put up with this kind of lifestyle. And, the early months of the Hamas war.
Excuse me for interrupting. You don't hear sirens? Because I'm getting an alarm that in Jerusalem, it says enter the protected space. You don't hear sirens?
I'm in Ashkelon.
Oh, Ashkelon. Oh, okay. All right, I'm sorry.
Yeah, hearing a siren, but thank you. By the way, the alarm system, the way the system works, just so you guys know, is we get a warning that you just heard. That means that they've detected that ballistic missiles, usually ballistic missiles, have been fired from Iran or sometimes from Lebanon.
It looks like this, by the way. This is what the alarm looks like on our phone.
And that they send often before they know exactly where the missile is going to hit. So they give you a very wide range. And that's basically, wake the kids up if they need to be woken up, if you need to go to the bathroom, if you need to get closer, if you're outside somewhere, you need to go 5-10 minutes to get to a bomb shelter because it might be happening.
Yeah.
And then about 1.5 minutes before the missile will actually hit, then they give a much more pinpointed, almost neighborhood by neighborhood, that the alarm goes off. Like I'm in a small city, and when the alarm went off was at the beach. It was another neighborhood within the city. So we heard the alarm going off, just a few blocks away, but we, in theory, didn't have to go. We did anyway, just to be on the safe side. But so there's a whole really good system that works almost all the time. So how long can we take it? It's really hard. It's a very, very stressful situation. And if you go on to the Israeli news, one of the constant messages that the politicians are putting out, and even the newscasters are putting out, because the whole country knows that we depend on it, is that we, the citizens, are part of this war. We're on the front lines of this war, because if we sort of rebel or just can't take it anymore and say the war has got to stop because we just can't take it, then the war ends, and perhaps the war ends before we finish the job. So the country realizes that the government realizes that it's a major priority to both protect the citizens for their own right, for their own sake, obviously, but also for the sake of being able to reach the war goals. So, and that's also where they're trying very much. They evaluate day by day. Can we open up the schools? Can we open up the gyms? Can we open up the malls? How far can we go and feel comfortable with it so people can a little bit resume their day-to-day life? Schools obviously are a huge issue because anybody who has little kids can't go to work, and also the kids go crazy and the parents go crazy and the kids lose the school days. But on the other hand, to have, 500, 600, or 1,000 children in one building when there are missiles falling on you, and you have to, even if there's bomb shelters, which most of them have, but to herd them, in a few minutes into the bomb shelters, then that's a really potential for a tragedy that, I'm glad I don't have to make that decision.
Yep. Yeah. Given that, Eric made a comment about diminishing return, which we could understand, is that your capability just gets less and less, but like you said, the capability doesn't go away until a official something happens. So do each of you have any thought about what does Israel see as what must happen to get this done so you aren't being attacked anymore?
So, okay, I'll take off kind of where Ephraim left off and then and tie it into what you're asking. It's my opinion that the Israeli population, while very inconvenienced the way Ephraim described, is willing and able to continue going forward the way we are now if it means we're able to continue reducing the capacity of the Iranians to live up to their promises of killing us. Okay? It's a price we're all certainly willing to pay, and the inconvenience associated that it makes in our lives and the lives of our children, and we're willing to live with and go forward. If somehow, Ephraim, taking what Ephraim said, imagine for a moment, a school full of kids gets hit by a missile, and we're looking at a catastrophe of 100, 200, 300 children killed. It's the loss of human life here that will start changing or impacting people's views on is now is the time to stop or not, okay? And we're nowhere near that. Hopefully that will never happen or will not happen here. And all the indications are so far that it won't. Iran now is sending over what they call cluster missiles. So within a single missile, they'll have like maybe 50 separate 2 kilogram, which is like 4 pound explosive charges. They can spread out over maybe, I'm trying to put things in US units, maybe 5-mile radius, and they can really do damage to homes. They're threatening, and they have the capacity to send over missiles that have 1 ton. Now, we're not talking about English ton, we're talking about metric ton. It's 1,000 kilograms. It's like 2,000 pounds of explosive warheads. But so far, the Israeli intrusions, interception systems that were all home developed are doing an outstanding job of taking these things out. We've only had 2 direct hits that resulted in serious damage and serious loss of life so far, knock on wood. So that's been the essence of it so far. So, the formal goals of this war, I think, are not formally set in concrete, and they seem to change depending on who you talk to and how it happens from day to day. To achieve regime change, first of all, I don't think anyone outside of perhaps special forces launching certain kinds of specific narrow missions. And there's actually it hasn't been reported and verified, but there were a lot of rumors that there were a couple Israeli special force units on the ground in Iran last week. But no one said anything, so who knows? But that could happen. Outside of that, it's hard to imagine any major presence of troops landing in Iran. I don't think President Trump has that in mind, and I don't think the Israeli army here has that in mind. So to do regime change from the air is virtually impossible. There are a couple examples in history. So to have that as a goal is really dangerous, I think, because when you set a goal in a war, you define success whether you meet your goals or not. And to say that's what a goal and to make that contingent upon the success of the American and Israeli operations is, I think, quite dangerous. It'd be nice. And I firmly believe that both the United States and Israel are laying a lot of groundwork to try to enable that to happen, and even including possibly arming certain factions within the population. Or it's my belief, and I have good reason to believe, based upon things I've read and interviews I've heard, that Israel is very consciously taking out IRGC positions and army positions in the northwestern part of Iran, which is very heavily, almost 100% dominated by a Kurdish population. The Kurds are a Muslim minority living in their population spreads through northern Iraq, northwestern Iran, northeastern Syria, and the very eastern part of Turkey, all those 4 areas. And they're a pretty ethnically tight community. They speak their own language. They are Sunni Muslim, but they're not fanatic, like we see in Iran or we see in Qatar with the Muslim Brotherhood, but they are pretty modern. So, and they were very major allies of the United States in the war against ISIS. And so I know that Israel is doing what it can to pound the Iranian military positions in the northern part of the country near the Kurdish population, in probably the hopes that, they can encourage the Kurds to take the initiative because their risk is minimized. But it remains to be seen whether these kinds of things will start happening in Iran or when they will be happening. In the meantime, the U.S. is, I think, pretty much done taking out the navies. When President Trump got on a CBS interview yesterday and said, well, the war is just about over. They have no more Navy. They have no more Air Force. He's 100% right. They have no more Air Force. They have no more Navy. But I don't think he plans on ending it this week. And I don't think the Israeli Air Force is planning on ending it this week. But, so I don't think it's days, and I don't think it's more than a few weeks. If this lasts more than 3 or 4 weeks, I'd be surprised.
Yeah.
But it might.
Yeah. As we come to this.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, well, it's getting there. So we have a few more questions to ask both of you about that. With the new, Khomeini's son now being the supreme leader, we want to come back and talk about Hezbollah. What when we say an end, which we know isn't, let's say it's not a regime change per se, but what will be an end where, let's say, Israel can go back to being semi-normal? Semi-normal meaning you're always under that threat of what Iran can do. So we'll come back and talk about that. But thank you so much for setting this up and telling us, what's really happening over there. And it's kind of interesting that you're showing us live that you live under that constant movement where you have to consider going to a bomb shelter all the time, and that's in America. We don't even know what that even feels like. So it must be interesting. So thank you so much, and we will pick this up again and pray for everyone to remain safe. So again, thank you, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.